Welcome to Network Capital. Today we have a very special guest, Santanu Bhattacharya, who's a management consultant turned award-winning novelist. In today's masterclass, we will talk about Santanu's meandering career and how he essentially connected the dots and built his category of one. I know Shantanu for several years now, but I decided to get back in touch when one of our community members said that, hey, there's this brilliant new author. You have to get him back on Network Capital, have him tell his story. And I realized that he's a friend of mine. So here he is, Santanu. I'll start by letting him tell you who he is and how he identifies himself today. And please dive in and enjoy.
So you didn't just become an author one day, did you? This was a process. You were tinkering around. You like to read and write. What was like the first brush with thinking about writing as a career? Seriously, what were you doing at the time? Where were you personally, professionally in your life?
Um, I mean, writing as a career, I think, has only clicked now, after two books. But I've always been a very big reader, and quite indiscriminate. I
Mm,
read everything. I do have a bias for fiction over nonfiction. I feel like I
mm,
do a lot of nonfiction reading, with like reportage and journalism and magazines and things like that. So nonfiction books, not so much, even now. But I've always had a thing for fiction, and I read quite. There was a time when I completely dedicated myself to Bangla literature, just because I felt like I'd grown up, in English medium schools, and I'd missed out that kind of phase of reading in my mother tongue and so on. So that we're quite and we're very interested in Hindi literature. I've started reading some, but anyway, that was so. But I guess like if you are a very um, passionate reader, then you're imbibing words. Then some of it also channels itself out of you. Um,
mm.
it's like if you listen to a lot of music, it's impossible that you don't hum a song. Now whether you're good at it or not is a different question. So I was always writing. I think in my late 20s is when I started writing short stories. So started actually giving some form to my thoughts, and sent it off to friends, and they would read and they would comment and so on. And then um, this was around 10 years ago where I submitted a short story to a competition in the UK actually, but I was in Mumbai.
2016 types, 2016.
No, that was 2011.
Oh,
Uh,
wow. So 15
yeah,
years. Mm,
yeah. Oh wow, actually, it's been 15 years. Yeah. So and I won the first prize. This was I was in Mumbai, but this was a UK competition. So entries had come in from across the world, and I had won the first prize. And that I think really was a huge boost. In like, wow, what I'm writing has legs, could have some readership, has some recognition, and so on. And that's when I kind of took it a little more seriously. It was never a kind of a career choice per se, because I didn't know anyone. Like my family is a very working family. Everyone had jobs, and we were very much kind of like in the salary cycle. Like I still don't know how to make finances work without a salary cycle. Like
mm,
there's an amount of money at the end of the month. You pay your bills, you do some budgeting. So career wise, I mean, it was never like that big a priority for me. The priority was always to just be able to write and put work out there, and see what response is coming from the world. And so in 2016, I started writing a novel, which then went on to kind of get finished in 2019, the first draft. And then from there, lots of revisions, lots of getting feedback, and so on. And then I got my first book deal in 2021. And my first novel, One Small Voice, came out in 2023. And even then, the first book felt like a fluke. It felt like, I was dabbling in something, and now that project has reached its fruition.
mm.
And I think it's only with the second book coming out last year that it has now started to feel like it probably wasn't a fluke. Like if I keep writing, if I keep putting more into this, then something could kind of grow from this point.
I think I told you that one of my friends, Dhruva, he was visiting home And he said that one person you need to bring on Network Cavalry soon is this author I've been reading. It's such a well-written book. I'm hooked. I said, oh, yeah, sure, let's do that. Who's the author? And he said his name is Santanu, and he said it in a very particular way, Santanu Bhattacharya. I said, oh, yeah, the name rings a bell. Like, what's the book about? And then he handed me the book, and I took a look and I said, hey, oh my God, I know this person. So that's the day I realized that all your years, like those 10,000 hours or whatever of effort, have paid off into, what do you call widespread fame? Not that you did it for fame, but, every author wants to be read. And Dhruva, he's an eclectic reader. He reads widely, but he's a really good eye for the kind of recommendations one would have. And I was so proud that day. So congratulations
Thank
for
you.
what you've
No, and
done.
that's very kind of him to have spoken about the book.
You'll probably see him as a good friend of mine. And has just really good taste in books and everything else. Uh, you made it sound that this journey was effort, analysis, outcome. And I know that's not the entire story. There were a lot of rejections involved, a lot of complex decisions that you had to navigate personally, financially, professionally, and so forth. So let's start with professional. How you were, I believe, at a consulting firm, and before that, an impact analysis firm. You have like a busy schedule. How does the process of pitching, dealing with the work dynamics, uh, finding publishers, agents, etc., worked, and what motivated you to stick through this?
Yeah. Um, I think it was really for the first novel and for both novels actually, it was really the story I wanted to tell. It's there are two ways you can come into writing and writing as a profession. I think one is, you say, I want to be a writer. And a lot of people, some people do that, when they're very young, they say, I want to be a writer. And then they study English literature in university. They go for masters in creative writing. So you start building your CV as a writer, and then you're writing on the side as well. Um, so I think that's one path, and a lot of writers actually take that path. Whereas for me, it was never that. I studied engineering, then I studied public policy. I worked.
In between, I think you got a master's or something in engineering as well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
if
I
I'm
did
not
a
mistaken.
bachelor's. I did a
Yeah,
bachelor's in engineering from Manipal, like any good Indian boy. And you went to Manipal as well.
I did not. Yajur did go to Manipal.
Okay.
Yeah,
You were in Delhi.
I was in Delhi, yes.
Yeah. Um, So then I went to National University of Singapore to do a master's in engineering, then worked in tech for a few years, then, moved into, started on this United Nations project, then moved back to India with Teach for India. That's where we met. Then there was a career in the charity sector, then did a master's in public policy. So, I guess I was kind of designing my life in on a different path altogether. And so for me, it was never about, being a writer wasn't intentional. It was almost, like I want to tell this particular story. And then, you keep doing it more and more. You spend some time
Mm,
with it. The characters start coming into kind of, taking on a life of their own. And then from there, you become so obsessed with the story that it almost becomes a part of your life.
mm,
So that was like a big motivation that I really want to tell this story. And for me, I think the penny drop moment was when I finished the first draft. So it took me 3 years to finish the first draft because I was so busy. And I'd take a week off during Easter. Use the Christmas break and so on, the weekends. Um, to keep writing little by little. But when I finished the first draft in 2019, that was a big penny drop moment. That was when I said, "Wow, this is a full novel." And it could be, and it was a lot of it was drivel, and a lot of it had to be rewritten, and I had to
mm,
kind of start on a fresh page again and again because I was also self-teaching. I hadn't gone
mm,
to university to learn writing. I hadn't done the arts, studied the arts, and so on. But I think just that the act of having finished the novel end to end put some wind in my sails, and I said, right, like now that I've done this, this was a lot of work, and I really want to put this out in the world, and that led to the ambition of wanting to get published.
mm.
Yeah.
Did
In
your
terms of how did
partner?
I kind of,
Yeah.
as you say, I mean, it is a very busy life. Like a professional, any professional life is a very busy life, and life in, as you said, these consulting firms can get very all-consuming. Um, but I always talk about it as, my writing is like a bit like parenting. No matter what you do in your day job, you always find time to be a parent. It's always
Yeah,
there.
that's such a good analogy. Yeah.
It's always there at the back of your mind. You could be making a client presentation, but you are thinking that, I need to schedule that vaccination for my child, right? So there's almost there's a whole different part of you functioning in parallel in your mind and heart, that you've dedicated to your child. And in that sense, if you are creating art, if that's how you think about your writing, then there's part of you that's always functioning on that plane that doesn't interfere with your everyday life, and you will always find time for it. I woke up at 4 a.m. every day when I was writing and I had a full-time job. So and I'm somebody who's quite blessed in that I can do with less sleep. 5-6 hours of good sleep is good for me. So I woke up at 4 every morning, wrote until 8, and then went to work. So there was a lot of discipline needed, but I think like if you feel really strongly about something, then you always make time for it.
For sure. Um, what was your surrounding like? You had your partner, your parents, sister, friends, etc. Um, did they read the initial draft before you started sending it out to agents? What did they say?
Mm. My partner did. So he's the guy in my kind of immediate surrounding because we're in London. My parents are in India, my sister's in Singapore, so we're all quite spread out. My partner did read. A few trusted friends read, people I knew were readers and readers of the kind of, material that I was writing. Um, and yeah, I got a lot of feedback. Then I think after the second draft, when I had hit a bit of a roadblock and I wasn't being able to figure out where to go from here, but I still knew that it wasn't, what I wanted it to be in terms of quality. I also opened it up to my friend. She ran back then a writing group in Bangalore. So, they were very kind enough to read the full draft at that point
Mm,
and give me feedback. I also sought feedback from some kind of an editor in the US who had quit his job in Penguin at that point and was doing freelance editing and things like that. So yeah, I mean, there was a point at which I had to open it up because writing is very solitary. If you the analogy I give to people who don't understand the world of writing is a bit like, you are a coder and you have an idea for an app, right? And you are then pretty much coding on your own. After working hours, you're just sitting and coding on your own, and you could take that app anywhere. Like you could build anything you want. All you have is kind of an operating system, and you need some input, you need mentorship, you need collaborators to be able to keep
mm,
making it better. And so at some point, you also have to let go of your insecurities and vulnerabilities and invite the world into your work to start giving feedback and be very receptive to that feedback as well. A lot of writers, a lot of creators are very close to their work and get very defensive. They're not very good receivers of feedback. Um,
mm.
but I have found that I actually really welcome feedback. To me, it's not that I would accept everything, but I am very open to listening to what people are saying.
Fantastic. So, I remember you talking about a competition that you won, and that created like an inbound channel where lots of agents started reaching out to you. And this is something that I'd love for you to elaborate on because I know that there are a wide range of agents available, at least in the UK, and I'm sure they get several pitches, but normally they don't respond. At least this is what I've heard. For my books, it was inbound, so the publishers reached out. So I didn't exactly have to go to through an agent. But in the UK, as you told me, you sort of need an agent.
Yeah.
So what does this agent author publisher dynamic eventually look like? What's your advice for people?
Yeah. Um, so yeah, like you said, in more kind of mature publishing markets, the US and the UK, no publisher now um, accepts unsolicited manuscripts, and no publisher works directly with the author. So you have to go through an agent. So it's a bit of a kind of, it's that first level of filter, because I guess like publishers are so inundated that they need that kind of that first filter to
Hmm.
before work comes to them. Um, and this is a function of me not knowing the industry at all back then, being such an outsider. After I finished my first draft, I said, "Well, my novel's done. It's time to get it published." And I made a list of agents across the UK who would, who kind of seemed to represent authors like me or work that I'm writing, and I sent it off to all of them. And I think about 20% of them rejected it, and about 80% of them never got back. Um, and that was the first draft, and now I realize, I mean, it was very naive, of me to do that. I should have kept working at it, made it much better. But also, you could be working at something for years and still not hear back from agents. It's really, it's one of those games that have no rules.
Hmm.
You kind of, you keep doing your thing, and one day you'll get lucky. But for me, what happened is in 2021, I started. There are many competitions in the UK, which is a really, good thing. Many competitions in the UK for unpublished writers, and especially for fiction. I don't know how many are there for non-fiction. But I started sending excerpts of my novel out to these competitions. And there was also kind of this life writing prize, which I sent a short kind of memoir piece that I'd written. Um, and that year, I was pretty much kind of either longlisted or shortlisted for everything that I entered. And I won three prizes. And I think that really, I mean, I joke that I probably peaked even before I got published, and it's only downhill from there. But that really brought me to the attention of all these agents. And the day after I won the Life Writing Prize, um, there were some 25 agents wanting to talk to me, and this was, during COVID, so they all wanted to Zoom. So yeah, I think my journey again, as it always seems to be, is kind of the other way around, where when I was approaching agents, I wasn't hearing back from anyone, but then I kept putting my work out, and the work then attracted agents back towards me.
Fantastic. So tell us how you wrote the first novel. What's the broad situation that you're trying to tackle? It's a complex one and not an easy one to write about. So give us a high level
Yeah,
overview of the book and the construction of it.
yeah. So One Small Voice is the story of a guy, Shubhankar Trivedi. He's from Lucknow, and essentially, I mean, what the novel is trying to look at is the Indian millennial experience, the experience of in the first, what I call the first generation of Indian millennials, so people who grew up in the late 80s and through the 90s, which was a time of immense change in India on multiple fronts. We had the economic liberalization, which opened up our markets, and suddenly there was a lot of money. There was a promise of money. There were all these multinationals. There was, the IT jobs and so on. That led to a certain kind of pressure on this generation. Then there was the technology, which also came in a big way in the late 90s and early 2000s. So there's the internet, a whole different way of people interacting, a whole different kind of gateway to the world opening up in a way that I and the first generation of millennials, I feel like we've seen it all. We've seen times of there was a period in my early years when we only had Doordarshan. And then we had, Doordarshan and a second channel called DD Metro. And then, the cable TV came. And then the internet came. So the world started opening up little by little for us. So, we've seen kind of a world where we didn't kind of have that portal into the outside world at all, and a world where we're just hyper connected, now with the smartphones and stuff. And then the third thing I think that we were also contending with is the rise of nationalistic right-wing politics. And my novel starts with the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992 and the riots that followed. And that entire decade was a very violent decade for India because right after that were, the Bombay bomb blasts, and then you had the attack on the parliament, and then you had 9/11 in between. And it was just one thing after the other. So a lot of, contending with the political violence that was kind of rocking the country as well. And we all kind of, took stands, and kind of through those years we realized where we stand, what is our politics as well, and that led to certain alliances and friendships and the breaking of relationships as well, breakdown of relationships with family and extended family and so on. So this character is kind of my vehicle to talk about all of those subjects. He sees something, in the riots that followed the Babri Masjid demolition, and he holds it very close to him. He doesn't talk about it. And then later he moves to Mumbai, and this is his opportunity to kind of, live life in the big city, make friends he would otherwise not meet in Lucknow. Um, and so kind of his reckoning with his country, with his family, with his politics, with his friendships, and so on. So that's the story.
Was it easier to write about it away from your home country because you had the distance? You could also look at the macro trends from the world.
No, I don't think I've been asked that before. And I've thought about it. I don't think so. I was writing, even when, I was writing bits and pieces of it even when I was living in India. In fact, I think it takes a lot more work to write about a place from outside the place.
Mm,
Because you have to, especially with fiction, where you're not always just kind of, your writing is not factual. Your writing is at a very kind of human emotional plane. And
mm,
so, you're thinking about what people are feeling, how they interact, what the sights and smells are, what films, what are the popular songs of that time. So I had to keep kind of going back and watching a lot of films from the 90s and listening to a lot of songs, and like go through a lot of old pictures of my travels through India, um,
mm,
and things like that. So it took a lot of work to kind of keep evoking India while writing in London, which is a very different place, right?
mm,
Sensibility wise. So no, I don't think it's particularly easy to write. I think what helped was the distance in terms of time. Enough time had gone by.
mm,
And I was a child when these things had happened, or I was in my teenage years, I was growing up, whereas I was writing as a 30 something, and enough time had gone by, and I had become hopefully slightly wiser to be able to stand back and have a view of that and kind of start to see that as a snapshot rather than, if you're writing something which is happening now, you're in the middle of it. So emotionally, you are in a lot more turmoil and you don't always have that clarity. And then one of the biggest things about writing about kind of real topics is clarity, is that kind of
mm.
conversation you need to keep having with yourself to be able to write about them. And time helps. Time gives you that opportunity to stand back and look at all of that in a snapshot.
Trauma seems to be not a theme, but at least one aspect of one small voice. How did you, how does the narrator, the protagonist, experience trauma through different stages of his life?
Yeah. I think I think trauma is something which is very front and center to the conversations we have now. I think it's almost something that was never talked about and acknowledged in previous generations, and even when we were growing up. And somebody said this recently. He said, trauma, we only knew trauma as a physical thing, where you have an accident, you have a fall, and you have a bruise, and that's the definition of trauma, the medical definition of trauma. So I think mental emotional trauma is something that we're still trying to understand in the modern world. And it's great that we're talking about it. But sometimes we might also be a bit facetious about it, where like a dog barked at me and I'm in trauma or something like that. So I'm just like, sorry, I'm making a joke out of it, but sometimes we use it a bit loosely as well. And I wanted to make sure that I'm not falling into that trope. That if I am depicting trauma, then it is actually something that is, he is, and like I said, the protagonist, he sees something when he's very young. He sees actually he witnesses a scene of a riot in front of his eyes, and for various reasons he decides not to talk about it. So he's carrying it inside him, and so it's never really fully been resolved. And I think it comes out in very different ways. It comes out in his relationship with his family, how far away he wants to go away from his family. The rise of kind of violence, the rise of right wing violence in India, um, which started with the kind of demolition of the mosque, but has become kind of almost a street level thing now. You don't know when a mob's going to gather and something bad is going to happen. Um, um, so I think like contending with all of that, yeah, it was so that the trauma is one part of it is being carried from his childhood, but it's kind of being fed that there's more fuel being added to the fire by everything
Mm.
that's happening around him, and so there's kind of a past and a present day aspect to it.
Right. Uh, and the way this trauma is talked about, it's far from facetious. It's very relatable, but it does also take a political stance, like or at least a political lens, and that political lens seems to have taken off in other parts of the world as well. In the UK, in the US, Middle East, what have you. In some ways, India is the least violent place in one regards today. But there's also this narrative that there are authors who try to make India seem more violent and more gruesome than it is. Did you navigate this tension at all in any feedback you got, or while you were constructing the authors, or when you decided to talk about it? I just want to know your thought process because you are somebody who's well read, well versed on both sides. You're also now somebody who talks about politics more openly, which is not something that many authors do. So if you could just walk us through this analytical
Hmm.
dance that you may have had to do.
Hmm. I always kind of move away from this fallacy of more or less of anything,
Mm.
um, because like you just said, India's less violent than other places or more violent. I mean,
No, no, I'm not. I'm just saying
no, no,
that,
I'm
like,
just saying
what's,
that
yeah, yeah.
there seems to be this dominant narrative of everyone's trying to broad brush stroke, right? Everyone's trying to put some labels. Oh, this is more violent, or this is more convenient. This is why everyone's trying to. I feel this is my personal opinion. That everyone's trying to justify their life choices
Hmm.
with some sort of macro narrative. So somebody who's decided to live in the city is trying to say, oh, look, city life is so good and village life is shit. Somebody who's decided to go settle on a farm is saying, oh, look, village life is so good, city life is shit. Somebody who lives in the West says, oh, West is so good, global South is bad. Somebody in the global South is saying the opposite thing. So I feel like we're all, but the
Sort
reality.
of justifying one's choices. Yes, that's very
Yeah,
much.
I mean, the reality of the situation is actually a lot more nuanced. The reality of the situation is that we think that it is a choice where we've chosen to live, or the kind of lives we've chosen to live, the kind of jobs we've chosen to do. But actually, not a lot of it is our choice. Life is by many different forces has brought us to this point.
Hmm.
If you want to live in the West, you can't just get up and live in the West. You have to kind of think about visas and jobs and employers and all of that stuff. If you want to, for somebody like me in a same-sex relationship, same-sex marriage, if I want to live in a place like India, I have to start thinking about, the fact that my marriage means nothing in India. And India, the Indian state could nullify or will nullify my marriage, which is by British law. And, if something happens to me, then, nothing passes on automatically. Like, my partner will not be my next of kin, right? We can't have a child together if we ever wanted to do that. So I think we think about where we've ended up in life as a choice, but actually, there are several forces which are way
Mm.
beyond us that are deciding where we live, what kinds of lives we lead, etc., etc. So then, to kind of broad brush stroke it, as to explain my choices is very fallacious, and there's you know also feel like violence has so many different aspects to it. To me, I mean, you've done this, like we've been on Bombay locals. To me, that is a very violent act. To get on a Bombay local and go to work every day, to try to get on that train, to stand on that train with like 100 bodies pressing against you, to try to get on or get off that train. I'm not going to romanticize that, like Spirit of Bombay or whatever that I see on Instagram. And I'm not going to romanticize that. For somebody who has to do that from Virar to Churchgate every day, it is a violent act that they have to put themselves through every day. So violence happens at home, violence happens on the street, violence happens in our commute, in schools. If you are marginalized, like I grew up gay in India at a time when homosexuality was criminalized, which only got decriminalized 8 years ago. I think of that, that period as, extremely mentally violent now looking back, having to constantly conceal yourself, having to, second guess everything that comes out of your mouth, having to look over your shoulder. It is mentally violent. So I don't think it's for anyone else to define what is violent for one person and what is not violent for, um, if you are a religious minority and you live in the fear of your house being bulldozed because you said something wrong, or you decided to pray somewhere, um, that is violent, something that maybe you and I are not able to relate to, right? So I think violence is personal. It is defined by the circumstances of every single person. And for me, therefore, what I do in my fiction, and that's why I love fiction so much, because it helps me move away from those grand narratives and helps me focus on a person, on a character. And once I've built that world, violence becomes relevant or pertinent only to that character. And so to me, what is happening in that person's life is the most important thing. I can divorce myself from, because I could never speak for 1.4 billion people, right? I can never speak for 8 billion people of the world. I can never speak for 800 million gay people in the world. I can never speak for any one community because that's millions and billions of people. So for me, I choose a story and a protagonist who seems most appealing to me. And then I try to tell their story to the best of my ability with as much truth as possible. And then my job is done. I'm not here to make any grand narratives. There's a lot of data, a lot of research, a lot of Instagram wisdom. If that's what you're looking for, there are other places.
Maybe not a novel. But thank you so much for explaining these difficult, often obscure concepts from your lens. Not only because the book is done well, but the process of figuring it out for oneself. As you said, violence is personal, trauma manifests in different ways. This will probably empower many, many people around the world, and perhaps that's why the book is done well. But let's shift gear to the next book. Here, the theme is perhaps even more personal, and temporality seems to be a big theme. Three generations, different contexts. Tell us about the origins of this book and what's it really about.
Yeah. Deviance is the story of three gay men in the same family. And so they're related as uncle and nephew, so mama bhanja, mama bhanja. And yeah, it's kind of the oldest character, Sukumar. He is a young man in the 1970s, and so we follow his story from the 70s to kind of the early 2000s. Then his nephew Mambro, he is growing up in the 1990s, and then his nephew Vivan is a 17-year-old in modern day Bangalore. And so it's looking at homosexuality from the lens of three different generations. And I think this is one space where so much has changed, but also not. So it's kind of that, that friction between kind of social change and social taboo. And, there are days when I feel nothing has changed, and then there are days I feel like, wow, look at me now, look at the world now, and something that my previous generation could never have imagined. I couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. And so it's trying to capture the queer experience in India across this kind of period of time, spanning 50 years, and looking at the secrecy of our previous generation, the activism of our generation that finally got 377 repealed, and the modern generation that is almost like a post 377 generation, right? People who are coming of age in a post 377 world where homosexuality is not criminalized anymore. But then, what does that experience look like?
Mm.
So I wanted to kind of play around with that, but also kind of keep it in the same family so that there was a question of inheritance and legacy as well, because I feel like with so many queer people from our parts of the world, we have no inheritance whatsoever. We don't know people of the previous generation who were queer.
Tell us more about inheritance, because I think this is an important concept here.
I think a straight person has role models and examples all over the place. They have a template, and then you can choose whether you want to follow that or defy that or tweak that. That's for them to decide. But there is a template. You grow up, you are able to express your preferences, your desire. You can go out on dates openly. You talk to your friends about who you like, who you don't like. um, and then at some point, you get serious, you have relationships, you might want to then kind of settle down with somebody. You kind of talk to your family about it. Then, if all goes well, you're married, you have a marriage, you call everyone over, the marriage is legally recognized, you go to a court, you register or whatever. Um, you call whatever, your family, friends over, you have good fun. Then it's time to, think about growing the family, so you have children, so there's a part there's a
There's a template, like
yeah,
there are
and
role
then you
models.
can
There are.
you can decide
Mm.
what you want to do. You can say that, oh, I don't want to get married at 25, maybe at 30, or I want to wait for the right person, or I
Mm.
want to have two kids, or I don't want to have kids, right? So if there is a template, you can then play around with the template, which is, I feel like, our generation, a previous generation did kind of, accept a lot of what was given to them, whereas our generation is questioning those templates a lot more. But at least there is a template. With the queer experience in the global south, and this is not just India, but across the global south, huge parts of Asia and Africa, there is no template. Like, we don't know anyone from our previous generation who was gay. We don't know how their lives were. If at all we know about any gay person, it's probably such a sad life that we don't even want to be them. So they, even if there is knowledge of somebody from the previous generation, they are not our role models. We've never seen them be happy. We've never seen them with their partners. We've never seen them, be a couple living together, having social acceptance, and so on. So in that sense, there is no inheritance. Um, but there's no inheritance at a personal level of knowing people, but there is also just kind of no institutional inheritance, right? Like, there is nothing documented. Like, over here, you have museums, and you have, even then, I mean, they could do better. I went to the Queer Britain Museum. It's ridiculous. It's only 2 rooms of little things, and I was like, London is
Or the one in King's Cross.
yeah, and London is the queer capital of one of the queer capitals of the world. And how can you have a Queer Britain Museum that's just 2 little rooms funded by Elton John? Surely Elton John has more money than this to fund a bigger museum. So, even in the most advanced, liberated places, um, the queer footprint is so absent and non-existent, or just so small. And then in our parts, there's just nothing. There's nothing in terms of literature and film and our queer elders, and like who is our Oscar Wilde, who is our Alan Turing, even examples of things gone wrong could become fairy tales on which we could live, we could study, we could read, but we don't have any of that. So I think there's no cultural inheritance, there's no personal inheritance, there's no national institutional inheritance. So I feel like our generation had to just completely figure it out on their own. And that's why so many of us are late bloomers, because we were just, I mean, firstly, there was that draconian law that could put us in prison. And I have known many people to have been kind of extorted by the police just for holding hands in a park, you know. So there was a very kind of like material safety aspect to that. But even then, even when, our languages don't support. So, the linguistic inheritance, our languages don't support having these conversations. And for a lot of us, whose parents don't speak English or not that kind of conversant with kind of the global modern English, what language do you have these conversations in? Like, what does somebody in a village say to their mother if they want to come out, right? How do you say it in Odia or Telugu or Gujarati or whatever? So it's just, I think, like, it's a lot of figuring out by ourselves. And that's what the novel kind of looks at, what it means to have role models or not, what it means to have the language or not, what it means to have an online community or not. All of these different aspects of, how this space has evolved over time.
This is such a profound point. I was wondering if you were to look at the end of the book, is it a hopeful end? Is it an end which is melancholic? Is it a bit of both, or is it like a celebratory? How do you? Because there are glimmers of all of them. I'm just not able to put my finger on it. What do you think?
I mean, without giving out spoilers, if anyone wants to read it.
Yes. Yeah.
No, the I think my kind of thesis of this was that I think where we are now is that we are at least able to talk about it,
Mm,
and we haven't solved all the problems. In fact, these are circular when it comes to queer rights. I find that time functions not linearly but circular, in a circular way, where we're
mm,
given we're given some rights, it's taken back, we're given some rights, it's taken back, and it's happening worldwide now. In India, we repealed 377. The Delhi High Court repealed 377 in 2009, and then the Supreme Court reinstated it in 2013, and then it was finally repealed in 2018. So even there, for a period of 10 years, about 10% of Indian citizens were given a fundamental right, and then it was taken away. And there's
mm,
no kind of legal precedent for this anywhere in the world. And I don't think anyone talks about the trauma of that, of having to, of feeling the freedom, coming out, celebrating, starting to talk about yourself, and then having to, then being criminalized again. I mean, how dastardly, how cowardly of a state to have done that, to 10% of its citizens. But anyway, I feel like we're still fighting so many battles on so many fronts, but at least, the fact that this book has been written is in itself such an act of protest. The fact that this book is out in India, the fact that this is being read, the fact that it won all these prizes, the fact that we are having this conversation. And I feel like if not anything else, then at least this, is a win in itself. The freedom to exist and speak for myself and others who are doing it. Um, and that's the note on which the book ends as well. That the characters, the
mm.
oldest character is not around to speak for himself anymore, so that opportunity is lost. But at least the other two characters are speaking to each other about it. And that itself, I think, for the queer community, that itself is a win, because for a long time we weren't even talking to each other. We didn't even know how to find each other.
There's no, well, the community level, the means to form a community
Yeah,
was quite challenging.
yeah,
And sometimes within a family also, that community can be hard to find. And the book
yeah.
does an incredible job of it. What next? Are you still a consultant writer, writer only, human being? How would you introduce yourself, perhaps at a party 2 years hence?
Oh wow. I try not to introduce myself at all. Um, I mean, I do want to continue writing. Um, like I said, I think with the second book, it felt like this could now be an emerging career. That if I put more into it, then more could come out of it. And I have a lot of ideas for books I want to write. Um, so I'm continuing to write, and we'll see where that goes. Publishing in itself is an endangered industry for so many reasons. People's attention spans have gone down. People are reading lesser. Even if they are reading, nonfiction is doing better. Fiction is not doing that well. Um, there's all of these distractions. We have Netflix and Amazon Prime and Insta Reels that's taking people away from their, what traditionally would be reading time. Our previous generations, they were always reading. If you were literate, you read. Even if you could be reading a novel, you could be reading a spiritual book, you could be reading, I don't know, the Gita or the Quran or whatever. You could be reading even if not anything else, everyone sat and read the newspaper every morning.
Mm.
Everyone, like
In a shared space of
in a
some
shared
kind.
space. And
Yeah.
even now, like my parents, they get one English newspaper and two Bangla newspapers. And there's a point in the day, my dad starts with the English ones, my mom starts with the Bangla ones, and there's a point at the day where there's an exchange. So there's a place in the house where they come and put the paper down, like, I am done now, you can take this. And then, like, my mom will also come and put her paper down and say, okay, I'm done with the Anandabajar Potrika, you can read it now. So you know but also, like, the chai stalls, the pubs, everywhere there's like this whole, people read, and now people just don't read. Um, so publishing itself is an endangered species. Um, and that is something to contend with. AI is a big force to contend with as well. We don't quite know where it will go, what it will mean for us. So yeah, I can't make any grand proclamations of, where my career will be. It could just be that I want to write, but, it could be I never get published anymore. Or could be 3 books and then I'm out, or like 15 books, who knows? Um, but I want to keep writing. That's the intention I'm setting.
That's the constant. Yeah.
And and in some form or the other, if it's not books, then now you have Substack and so on. So there's other ways to reach out to people as well. um, but I think it's really unlocked something in me. um, and I feel like it's also connected me to a global community that I wouldn't have had if not for my writing. The kind of people who've reached out to me, like, even now, even a year after my second book and 3 years after my first book, I wake up to these Insta DMs, and that's the only reason I'm on Instagram, so that people can reach out to me. And I wake up
Mm.
to these DMs, like every once a week or twice a week, of people having read my book from, I don't know, the Czech Republic and Zimbabwe and Colombia and the Philippines. And you know, if not, if I didn't have these books, there was no way that I could be communicating with these people, sharing my thoughts and hearing theirs. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to do that. And once you have that, it's quite addictive, and that's what you write for. I don't care about the prizes and the recognition and whatever. It's, once you have this connection, like, that becomes the primary driver. Everything else is secondary. So yeah, I think I hope I'm able to continue writing, and writing stuff that is interesting to me and to people.
I'm confident you will. Shantanu, what a delight. Can't wait to do this again in person. You've built your category of one, and as your friend and on behalf of Network Capital people and everyone else who hear this, I have only one message. Go read the book, pick it up from the stalls nearby. It's available everywhere. Um, yeah, Santanu has given us one way to build a category of one. Not easy, but definitely worth it. Congrats, and I hope to see you in person very soon.
Thank you so much, Utkarsh, and thanks to Network Capital.